Thinking Tactically is a paid program. The information provided is not legal advice and should not be used in lieu of legal counsel. The views and opinions expressed by the hosts and their guests are not necessarily those of West Coast Armory North or this station.
Every day, we hear stories of innocent people who are the victims of violent crimes. Do you want to leave your personal defense up to someone else? Or take the initiative and be responsible and prepared to defend yourself and your family? If you answered yes, this is the show for you. Thinking Tactically, personal security for today's world. And now, here are your hosts, John Holshin and Kevin Smith.
Good morning and welcome to Thinking Tactically, personal security for today's world. I'm Kevin Smith.
And this is John Holshin.
All right, we want to thank you for joining us. Today is going to be the final episode of this series of Thinking Tactically. We're going to be off for the summer, and if you are interested in hearing from us again in the fall, please email us at thinkingtactically@gmail.com with any questions or topics or just that you want to have us back on the air. We're going to start this week with, obviously, a horrible tragedy occurred a couple weeks ago.
And just want to put out to you that our thoughts and prayers are with all the victims and families of those victims from the recent shooting in Orlando.
I know, John, we've talked a lot about the idea of active shooter preparation and how that plays out. And I know you wanted to talk a little bit about what had happened there and some advice or some things that people can do to be prepared in situations like that.
Sure. And we've touched on this before. You know, we've talked about active shooter preparation. We've talked about the run, hide, fight model. And really where I want to focus today, I mean, there's a lot of different places you can come at this from and focus on different aspects of it. But to me, the overwhelming piece that people need to consider is we're back to mindset. Remember the priorities of survival again, mental conditioning, tactics, skill, and equipment. Back to mindset, back to mental conditioning. We need to realize that bad things happen to good people, and they do so unexpectedly. You can't schedule your emergency. You don't know when it's going to happen. So you've got to think in advance and get your head in the right place. You know, when I read about, hear about, and in this case see videos of people that are in these situations that truly appear to be incapable of doing anything to make their situation better. Specifically, what I'm thinking about are the groups of people that took shelter in the bathrooms. And I can understand, okay, the shooter is, imminently in front of you. There's no route to the exit that you feel is not going to get you shot, and you may find yourself in moving and you end up in a bathroom or a storeroom or someplace that's a dead end. I can see how that happens, although I would prefer to ensure that it doesn't happen. It could happen. But then we've got, by some reports, there were people literally piling into the individual stalls in the bathroom, as many as 10 to a dozen people per stall, and hiding there from the shooter. Well, you got to figure that this guy may come in. And in fact, he came into the bathroom. According to a couple of survivors, he walked up to the stall, stuck his hand over the top of the stall, and fired down into this crowded stall in the bathroom. While people basically either suffered in silence or cried out in pain and fear, or begged him not to shoot them. Folks, that's not where you need to be. That's not where you need to be. You need to be thinking about making the guy stop doing what he's doing. Okay, you found yourself in a dead end. Now what? You need to be at the door, mentally prepared should he walk through the door to take the initiative. There were dozens of people in that bathroom. There is no way, should even a half a dozen of them, even a fraction of the people there, had they jumped on him when he come through the door, almost certainly they could have overwhelmed him. And yes, some people might have been injured, but far fewer than what ended up happening. You've got to be willing to fight. You've got to get your head in the right place and realize that there are times that violence is the only answer. And again, we can talk about where does this come from. Those of you who have children in schools know that now what's being taught publicly in the school system is that violence is never the answer. I remember when I was in school, if there was a physical altercation, you sat down with the principal or whoever, and the question was, who started it? Who threw the first punch? Because that person was in more trouble. And in many cases, the person who physically defended themselves was not in trouble if, in fact, they hadn't, contributed to the event. Nowadays, the message that people are being taught is that violence is never the answer. The fact of the matter is, when you are faced with overwhelming evil violence, there is only one thing that is going to stop them, short of they get tired of it, and that is good people have to stand up and use whatever force is necessary to make the shooter stop or make the attacker stop.
Well, and it goes back to what we've talked about several times before, which is the run, hide, fight type of approach of, yeah, you want to run and get away from the situation. And if you end up hiding in a situation where you have to be prepared to fight if they come through that door. And sardine canning yourself into a small area where you can't defend yourself isn't the right answer.
Well, the way I look at it is I'm always prepared to fight. While running, I may go around the corner and run into the guy, in which case I'm going to fight. While hiding, if hiding is the strategy that you feel is appropriate, while hiding, you need to realize that he could come into your hiding place and you need to be prepared to fight. While hiding is the perfect opportunity to start thinking about what are the improvised weapons that are in the environment that I might be able to use. Is there anything on my person or in the environment that I might be able to use? But it comes from this core willingness to fight for your survival. Core willingness to fight. I mean, this country is based on a willingness to fight for concepts, for ideas. And now we're at a point where people don't feel they can fight even to ensure their physical survival. That is not where we need to be.
Well, and it goes back to even what you said with the elementary schools, when it used to be, when you were growing up, that if you were the one that was defending yourself, you wouldn't even get in trouble. I know that when I was in elementary school, I got in trouble for defending myself because I, quote, won the fight, and I was the one that had hurt the other person, but I wasn't the one that started. The kid attacked me, and I put him on his back, and then I'm the one that got in trouble.
So, and that's exactly it. So as we think about this, when we hear about these terrible situations, what I hope is that it causes you to engage in some reflection, engage in some mental preparation, engage in that thought process of being prepared should you find yourself in a situation to take decisive action, and while running and hiding, still being prepared for that eventuality that you may, in fact, have to fight.
Yep, absolutely. All right, we're going to take a quick break here, and when we return, we're going to be joined in studio by Insight's founder, Greg Hamilton. So stay with us. You're listening to Thinking Tactically right here on Fox Sports 1380.
You're listening to Thinking Tactically, personal security for today's world. Brought to you in part by West Coast Armory North, providing expert personalized service to each individual client. For more information, log on to westcoastarmorynorth.com. Insight's Training Center is locally owned and nationally recognized and offers the most complete self-defense, firearms, and tactical training available to civilians and private organizations, law enforcement, and military. In business for over 20 years, they've taught more than 20,000 private citizens, law enforcement officers, instructors, SWAT teams, corrections personnel, security officers, and military personnel, offering classes from basic self-defense and handgun safety to advanced tactic classes and everything in between. Insight's Training Center has a course for you. Their professional instructors come from highly specialized and thorough backgrounds in law enforcement, military special operations, and the private sector. Visit insightstraining.com for a complete list of upcoming classes.
Every day, there are men and women of our armed forces dealing with illness and injuries, and their families are unable to be by their side. Fisher House works to get the families of injured military members to their soldiers during these difficult times. They provide housing and transportation to help make certain our soldiers are not alone. Visit fisherhouse.org to see how you can make a difference in the lives of the brave men and women of our armed forces that have sacrificed so much for us. Those of us at Thinking Tactically and West Coast Armory North are proud to support Fisher House.
Taking responsibility out of someone else's hands and putting it into yours. This is Thinking Tactically, personal security for today's world. And now, back to more of the show. Here are your hosts, John Holshin and Kevin Smith.
All right, welcome back. You're listening to Thinking Tactically right here on Fox Sports 1380. We're now joined by Insight's founder, Greg Hamilton, and we're going to continue to talk about the Orlando situation and active shooter response.
Good morning, Greg. It's great to see you again. Thanks for coming in and being on the show.
Good morning, John.
You know, Insights Training Center and Greg Hamilton, for those of you that are unfamiliar with Greg and his organization, is a unique resource. We're lucky enough to have them right here in our part of the country. But in fact, they are unique in that there are very, very few schools and very few people as knowledgeable as Greg about tactics and preparation for a private citizen for self-defense. So I'm going to take this opportunity to delve a little deeper into the Orlando shooting and some of the lessons learned there.
Sure.
So what jumps out at you when you hear about this situation, Greg?
Well, primarily the bad guys are thinking much more strategically. They prep the battlefield. We've seen this over and over again. It's been ignored because it hasn't been that significant of an issue prior, but you know, the kids that shot up Columbine, they knew where they were going and what they were doing and what rooms they were going into. It wasn't like this was a spur-of-the-moment thing. Virginia Tech, the guy chained and locked exit doors, making it not only difficult for people to leave, but making it extremely difficult for law enforcement to get in. The guy in Orlando, he prepped the battlefield. He went to this place. He knew where his channelized locations were, where he'd be able to stop law enforcement from getting in. If you're going up a concrete hallway, it's really hard to do against a single guy with a rifle. There's just basically no way that law enforcement is going to get up that hallway. He knew he had a whole concrete structure. He knew where the exit doors were. We don't know if what exit doors he blocked or possibly blocked. We don't know where he positioned himself in the place to keep people from getting out, but obviously he did. So basically they're taking the time and they're looking. So your idea of where your primary exit's going to be, you know, people that carry guns have thought about this for a lot, you know, it gets talked about a lot, you know where the exits are and sit where you can see what's going on, etc. And that's the first level of things, but there's, you know, we have to think a little deeper because the bad guys are thinking deeper. And your primary plan may be blown out of the water immediately just because he did his homework.
So you're suggesting that planning in depth on our part to react to this planning in depth that the bad guys are doing?
Absolutely. We need to know, you know, if you're going to go to a place regularly, it's not like every time you go in every store that you've never been in before, never will be in again. You need to investigate whether there's bars on every window and whether you can climb out the bathroom window, etc. That's probably putting too much of a load on a person. But if you're going to a place regularly, you need to know, what doors can I get out of? Where do these doors go to? Does this door actually even open, right? Do these bathrooms have bars on the window and I can't break a window and get out of these because these people have secured the facility against break-ins? So if I'm going to a place regularly, I want to know where the doors are. I want to know where the channelized locations are. I want to know where the places I can get away are. Yeah, so a little bit of homework.
Absolutely. So you're looking at what the obvious exits are, and then beyond that, the less obvious courses of action. So first your exits, and then so after exits, if we can't get out, what are you thinking next?
Well, then I want to find a fairly hardened location or something that's going to be difficult for the bad guy to enter, where I'm going to get some reactionary gap opportunity. You know, if I'm not carrying a firearm, if I've made a choice not to carry a gun out of convenience or because of the law or whatever reason, then, you know, maybe I've got a pocket knife or maybe I just have my hands. Well, then I'm going to need a channelized location that's going to put him in extremely close proximity to me before he knows I'm there. If I have a gun, then obviously I want, like he wanted, I want some long channelized location that he has to come up to get to me. So, you know, in the modern world, that could be the stairwell to the roof. You know, I mean, yeah, I don't want to dead end myself if I don't have to, but if my only option is going all the way to the roof, well, I'll do that. And now he's got to come up a stairwell to get to me.
So for people that may not be familiar with the term, tell us a little more about what you mean by reactionary gap.
Well, the amount of time a person has to react. You know, when you see the light change, you have a certain amount of time that your body just sits there. You know you want to press on the gas, press on the brake, whatever it is, the next action you want to take. And there's a certain amount of time that your body doesn't move. And for most people, that's 0.2 to 0.3 seconds. Then you have the actual time it takes to respond. So let's just say something as simple as hitting the brake. You see something happen in front of you, you want to hit the brake. For a quarter second, your foot's still on the gas. Then when it leaves the gas to go to the brake, it takes X amount of time to get there. Let's say it takes another third of a second to get to the brake. So now we're already up to 0.5, 0.6 seconds of time that's gone by. Then, of course, the braking is not instantaneous. It takes time, right? And depending on the speed you were going, that could take a half second to a second to 2 seconds to slow the vehicle. That whole thing becomes reactionary gap. So when I'm facing someone, as we know from things like our street and vehicle tactics class where we teach people about reactionary gap, if you're within touching distance of someone, if they move first, there is no way you can keep them from touching you. It's impossible, right? If you move to approximately your height, you gain a significant advantage. So now we're at 5 to 6 feet of distance from a person, and if he goes to touch us, we have an opportunity to prevent him from touching us. Now, of course, we don't care about people touching us. It's an example if that guy had a knife in his hand or if he wanted to sucker punch you or whatever it is that he wanted to do. We need to know at what distance certain events can take place. We need to know because we need to protect ourselves from the opponent, but we also need to know when can we fit something into a time slot. And something like drawing my own gun, if I'm sitting there flat-footed facing a guy who's already ready for it and I don't do significant psychological manipulations to him to provide myself an extended reactionary gap, I've got a 1.5, let's be practical, the average concealed carry person, over 2 second draw probably, and he's got less than a 0.5 second reaction time. So 2 seconds against 0.5 seconds, we see how that's going to work out very quickly. He gets to win. So we need to position ourselves. So the first step, I think, is just geometry. We need to position ourselves geometrically, and we need to understand geometry so that we can manipulate the person to put him in a spot where he can't respond to my actions. Because I either concealed my actions visually, I was too close to him, etc. I used light to my advantage, the darkness versus the light. It could even be light that I'm using, not darkness. Later, then we get into using psychological manipulations.
So this is where, one of the somewhat common points of advice concerns me. We read in some of the government documents about active shooter, they talk about throwing objects. And the idea here is if you're going to throw something at someone, that implies distance. So now we've got somebody across the room, and I've read about, for example, in some schools, that the idea is they're always going to have a box of canned goods. And so everybody has a can, and when the shooter comes through the door, everybody throws the cans at him. So if we analyze that using reactionary gap, what we've just seen is we are now at a standoff distance where a firearm has a distinct advantage. We're going to throw things at him that don't likely have the ability to actually disable him. He weathers the storm of cans, and then what's he do? He starts shooting us. Using your example and using what we know about reactionary gap, we know where we have to be is within touching distance of that guy when he comes through the door. When he sees we're there, we need to already be where we've already got our hands on him, on that gun, getting that gun neutralized so we can go on then to do the damage we need to do to him to turn him off.
Absolutely. We prefer to touch him before he sees us, but even if he sees us, if we're inside that reactionary gap or inside that 0.25 seconds, 0.5 seconds response time, where we're going to touch him prior to the 0.25 seconds taking place, we're ahead of the game. Throwing stuff. I mean, if we look historically, great. Sure, if we all have our Viking throwing axes and we all throw them, but then we charge behind the hail of axes, that works really good. But the idea that we're going to stand there and throw things back and forth at each other is pretty ridiculous. Obviously, he has a projectile weapon and we have cans of food. That's not going to work. If all the kids threw their cans and then they all piled on him and stabbed him through the eye sockets with pencils, it would be a fine technique. Because it would be a way of closing a large gap, right? They have a large time gap. And sure, if I'm going to have to close 5 yards to a guy, I probably want something in the air between us to attempt to occupy him. Right. But then I need to be on top of him the moment that thing hits him.
Sure. So. And actually, that, as you depicted, if we have to close the gap, but if we're behind a locked door, we have the opportunity to close the gap before he ever opens the door.
Absolutely. Yeah, we should be close. And And we, the classic, little kids know how to do this. You hide behind the door, and when the guy comes through, you get on his back. We do it to each other when we play. It's not that difficult. That's not the first place he's going to look, especially in a big active shooter situation with lots of people. The first thing he's not going to do is look in all the corners. He's going to look in the big areas.
Sure.
And we only need a quarter second.
Yep, absolutely. And that's, we were talking before we went live and talking about the whole concept of run, hide, fight, and the necessity for short, easy-to-remember words, and how that can misinform, however, our mental picture of the situation and the priorities that we need to do things.
Absolutely. If, we program ourselves with our words. Our words create pictures. Those create emotional states. So something as simple as the word hide can easily be a disempowering word if we don't frame it correctly in our own head. And we have to use single words to have it be catchy. But the truth is I'm taking cover. I'm preparing to attack. So, an animal that is going to attack from hiding, like a cat or something, it is going to hide. It's going to use cover. It's not doing it like a prey animal. It's doing it like a predator. And that's what we have to keep in mind at all times, that if I'm hiding, I am no way cowering. I am, in fact, preparing my counterattack.
And that's if you envision that animal, you can see it. What's the body posture of that cat when he's using cover? He's sneaking up around the corner where he knows his prey's on the other side of it, or the toy that you're playing with. You can see his mental preparation. You can see where the muscles, the potential is for that rapid forward movement. Versus you've just startled him and he momentarily is cowering. And all the muscles, all the energy is going backwards and away. And that's, we're right there. I love the way you said that, leading us through that words create pictures, which create emotional states. And if in your mind you are hiding, your emotional state tends to be, I'm going away from this thing. I want to get away from it and hide. And actually, as you said, we are taking cover in preparation for attack.
Absolutely. And if you're hiding, if you truly are hiding and your muscles aren't activated, you've actually created a reactionary gap for yourself. You're not going to be able to respond when he activates you. When he comes around that corner, or his shadow is there, or whatever it is that you've set as your trigger, if you're in fear, you're going to sit there in fear for another quarter second. You just lost your gap, and now you're even again. But if you think about, if you ran track or anything, you're in the starting blocks and you're ready to go. You are sprung. You're ready to go. And you should be as sprung as you've ever been in this kind of a situation, obviously, because your life and everyone else's life is on the line. And that way, when you get activated, it'll be instantaneous. You're actually being held back, right? You are launched on him, being held back until he appears at the right moment.
That's exactly the way I think of it from martial arts and other training. It's almost like a jet that's trying to take off from a short runway, and the pilot is standing on the brakes while he's giving it gas, and those engines are straining. They're wanting to go, but the brakes are on. And you can do that both at the mental level and at the physical level. Mentally, I'm already moving forward. It's just the brakes are on. And at the moment that the stimulus is there, that I know that now I have a target, you release those brakes and you're moving much quicker. Both the lack of psychological reactionary gap and the physical muscular preparation for movement creates a much shorter opportunity for him to see you coming and react to it.
Absolutely. And, once again, we need to drive our psychology. My old friend Pat Rogers, who just passed away, got in a lot of trouble for saying that, at the moment of truth, you need hate in your heart. And people criticized him for using the word hate. And, if you look up what the word hate is, it's like you have a great dislike and you wish ill will upon this person. Well, that's exactly what you're doing at this moment. And you have to have some emotional content. You're talking about a person that's murdering 50 people. When that guy comes around the corner, I think you need to have your psychology in the right spot, your morals in the right spot, and you need to wish death and destruction upon this person. Otherwise, you're not going to get the job done.
Why would we not hate? Why would we believe that that it's inappropriate for us to hate someone who is in the process and has the full intent to kill as many people as possible?
Well, our social conditioning is pretty incredible, so we probably don't want to get on too too much of politics. I have my opinions, very strong opinions on that subject.
Indeed. So, run, hide, fight, 3 concepts. Also, it's important to keep in mind that is not necessarily the order that these are applied in. These are 3 approaches. These are 3 concepts. These are 3 tools that I might use to get through this encounter. Sometimes we're going from 0 to 150, and its fight is on immediately.
Absolutely. And I think we also need to think, in Special Forces, we call it our PACE plan, right? Our primary, alternate, contingency, emergency plan. And so you might have run, hide, fight, but do you have 4 levels to each one of them? Right, so right there, I'm going to fight with my gun, I'm going to fight with my pocket knife, I'm going to fight with improvised weapons, I'm going to fight hand to hand. If I'm going to run, what routes? How many routes do I have? Do I have multiple routes? Do all those routes lead to escape, or some of those routes lead to good fighting positions? Can I move 360 in this environment without him knowing and get behind him? So I think we need to have contingency planning, and that contingency planning needs to take into account. What if I'm here with, my 3 children who are all under 5 years of age? My options significantly change. What if the first thing that happens during this fight, if I get a broken femur, well, my options change. And I think that needs to be part of our visualization. Everybody visualizes themselves winning a clean fight with all the assets lined up on their side that they wish they had. And I think when we're doing our visualizations, when we're sitting there in a restaurant, or we have the time when we're driving around and we're thinking about these things, we need to put ourselves in disadvantaged positions mentally and say, how do I get out of this bad spot? How do I get out of this hole? I think that's critical. We need a huge Rolodex of prior decision making, and that all can't be from us having all our assets in place.
Absolutely. It's absolutely critical. It's easy to imagine yourself winning when you've got all your tools and everything's going your way. In fact, of course, that is the easiest win. Mentally, what we need to prepare for are the difficult times. Something that we do in class, I tell people to close their eyes. Imagine they're in a situation where somebody has just walked in and shooting people, and you've been hit. The go signal involved a volley of gunfire where you were wounded. And I ask people to visualize that for a few seconds. Then I ask them to open their eyes, and I go around the room and ask each person, tell me, where were you shot? The vast majority of people will tell me they were shot in an arm or a leg. Very, very few people will tell me that they were shot in the chest, and no one has ever told me that they were shot in the face or in the head. The fact of the matter is, I visualize myself winning in all of those situations. If you are not doing so, you are creating self-imposed limits. You're deciding, well, I could win if I'm hurt this bad, but I don't know if I could win if I'm hurt that bad. Again, my mental preparation is to win, period, and realize that my only limitation is I tell myself I don't have to fight if I'm unconscious. If I'm unconscious, I don't have to fight. I get a bye until I wake up. And when I wake up, I need to look around and figure out, is it still going on? Am I still here? Do I need to get back in the fight or not? Anything short of unconsciousness is just an inconvenience, and you've got to have the mental preparation to fight through it.
Sounds like a pre-scuba there. Back in the pool.
There you go. Absolutely.
You don't have to crossovers when you're unconscious, but as soon as you're done being drowned, get back in, catch up.
That's right. You're behind.
Yeah, actually, that's a tool we've been using for a long time, is that whole idea of where you've been shot. And nobody ever picks being shot in the face, and they don't picture being shot in the groin. And so right off the bat, either one of those is suddenly so bad that they can't conceive of it. Well, that means you have just created the opportunity for the opponent. You have just given him the hole in your armor. You've decided what it is. And, we need to be able to fight back no matter what. I remember one time, I don't have a lot of gunfight dreams anymore, but I remember a million years ago I had one, and it was so vivid. I got shot in the face, and it was so vivid I actually sat up in bed awake. It woke me up because it was so startling. And I was so mad that it woke me up that I made myself lay back down and start over from the moment I was shot in the face and then win. Right, and I think that's an important thing for everybody. It doesn't guarantee anything, right? There's never a guarantee, but this is how we prepare ourselves. We decide on standards of behavior prior.
Greg, you mentioned an upcoming class, a street and vehicle tactics course. That sounds pretty interesting. Tell us more about it, please.
Well, obviously, we get very focused on the big events, these these so-called active shooter, these mass killings, but that's not truly where the majority of the problem in life is, right? It's a minute issue among all murders, among all assaults, etc. So we want to, in our street and vehicle tactics class, we're focusing on what really does happen, what gets you hurt or killed in a public venue. And that's what we mean by street and vehicle is if we're out on the street, if we're in our car, if we're in public settings, what are the tactics for successfully navigating that? And in that class, we usually run it as a 3-day class. We're spending probably about equal thirds of situations in and around our car, walking down the street, which is your classic, street mugging situation, and the robbery type situations that would take place in convenience stores or in restaurants, things like that. So covering like I said, carjacking, street muggings, and public venue robberies or shootings.
Typical criminal activity, basically.
Yes. Yeah. And, working on that from the strategic down to the tactical. So, how do we not be where that stuff happens to first place? How do we spot it from a long distance so we can avoid it? How do we act so we don't get picked? And then finally, if we do get picked, how do we get out of it early? How do we know that we're in it so that we can preemptively act, so we have the confidence to preemptively act? And then finally, when you're fully behind the curve and you really didn't notice anything and the guy was really good and you're under the gun, how do you win?
That sounds like an incredible preparation. How long is the course?
3 days.
3 days. So in that time, you're moving from techniques in their basic form, then coordinating it into drills, and then culminating with actual scenarios.
Yes, absolutely. The third day, depending on the format, the third day is going to be at least a half day of kind of full scenarios where we're going to, have the convenience store and have the robber, and you're going to play various roles. You're going to be the convenience store clerk. You're going to be the unarmed person that just happened to walk in. You're going to be the actual robber. Seeing something, that's an important thing. Is playing the role of the bad guy actually is extremely valuable in class. To know what the opponent is seeing allows you to know more about when you can exploit certain things. How stressed he's going to be. What things he actually has to pay attention to. So you play all the roles, sometimes just an observer, but even as an impartial observer, now your stress level is so low that you can really see everything that's going on. Because as soon as I give you even the simplest of role, you can only focus on one thing at a time, and you're not really seeing the big picture. So we try to move people through all the roles, and we try to cover all the, building up the levels of complication from the simplest thing to, a more extreme event. Through, like I said, convenience store robberies or carjacking type scenarios, muggings, etc. So we start out with the basics. A lot of time is spent on things like body language communication, about your own body language, about not being picked from a long distance just by the way you carry yourself, but also how to read the opponent. We're gonna spend some time watching videos of some classic real victimizations so you can spot what's going on.
Yeah, all good stuff. And then there's the material in and around the car, too. Just things like you're shopping either by yourself or with people. You've got family members, that is. You've got bags of groceries. Tactically, what's the best way getting everybody in the car, out of the car, while maintaining awareness, while dealing with your packages, that sort of thing. Because we know that the bad guys, again, one of the tools that they use is situations where you are distracted, situations where they can get up close and personal with you before you see them coming. They have that element of surprise. That increases your reactionary gap. It limits your responses if they're already in close physical proximity. So go through all of that material as well.
Sure, absolutely. And that's, the class, is a good portion of it has been described as a software class. It's not a hardware class. It's not a how to use your equipment class, which is what everybody wants to go to. It's a how to think about things class. And if you have thought about things correctly, and if you have looked at the parking lot, just taken a glance at the parking lot and picked your parking spot consciously so that it gives you a proper L-shaped route to where you're going and coming back, parking not near other cars if at all possible, you just start denying the opponent the cover for action he needs to get near you. If he can't get within 2 car lengths of you, he can never really make an approach. So, and yes, not looking like a mess when you're trying to load the kids in the minivan definitely helps, right? You don't have to be a completely organized, perfect tactical person, but keeping your head up and having a plan and having an order of events. But the big thing is the prior work that's done. If you could get in and out of your car all incorrectly if you parked in the right spot. Now, we'd like to do all of it correct,
Sure,
because we're not always going to get to park in the right spot, and circumstances are going to change, and things like that. But if we're really thinking more strategically, the tactical stuff matters less.
And that's, one of the keys is when we go through all of this, we're going to give you the 100% answer. The good news is that in any given situation, you probably only have to get it 70-75% right to not be victimized.
Yeah.
But you don't know which variables aren't going to be available to you on a given day.
Right.
You don't know which of those aspects you're not going to be able to manipulate. So we want you to understand all of the possibilities that
Absolutely.
That impact on the situation.
Yeah, you want to run the full play, and honestly, even if you need 70%, I don't know. But
Sure.
but if once again, if you've done some strategic evaluation, if you've taken the time to actually look at crime statistics in your area, and you've picked the right places to go, if you go to the right bank and if you go to the right stores, and not just go to the right bank or the right stores, but you go at the right times. Finding out that a place is dangerous, supposedly, because it has a lot of crimes. Well, when do the crimes take place? If they all take place after your carriage turns into a pumpkin, just don't go there at that time period. And you've just negated your chance of being in a crime by a massive amount. So, it's all a big math problem. That part is, and there's no guarantees when you're doing those math problems, but it sets the stage for success. If I can go to a place that has 10% the crime of another place, if I can not fit the profile of the victim of those crimes, that's another thing. If all the crime is taking place in an area only to people that actually live on the streets, well, then it doesn't even apply to me, right? If all the crime is taking place to a certain population that I'm not part of, it doesn't really apply to me. So we can do a little deeper dive into the crime statistics, and we can say, well, I don't drive on this street if I don't have to. I don't go through this neighborhood if I don't have to. I don't go to this bank. I don't use ATMs on the sides of buildings, not when I can go into a nice supermarket that has a ton of people in it and is well lit and there's never a crime in it. Well, that's where I would go to get my money. Or I would just not worry about it, right? I don't fill up my gas tank with my car in the summer with the windows down 5 feet from a bus stop. Because that gave the guy opportunity to get to me, right? So we start picking places that make sense based on crime stats, based on the profile of the criminal and profile of the victim, based on the time. And that just takes a little bit of work. Most of us, we could do, a few hours of that work, and we're going to be good for years because we're not moving all over. We live in a place. We're going to have a job in a certain place. Now we just need routes between those places and routes to our recreational places, and just need to be a little bit picky about that stuff.
And the neat thing about the Street and Vehicle Tactics course is it prepares you on so many levels. So you've got that level that is all the preparatory work, as well as the, okay, we don't know how you got there, but you're in this situation. Now what's the best way out of it?
Absolutely. We are obviously big believers in solving the actual problem when it hits you. So we're definitely going to give people the absolute best tools for, how do I deal with this mugging that's actually taking place? I've got 3 guys now that are going to jack me up. How do I do this, right? I've got a guy with a gun in my face through my car window. Now what? And we want to get out of those situations as clean as possible.
I remember talking to a student of a past course, and he described a portion of the class, and I believe I've heard you use a similar description. It's how to get mugged safely.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. It's a... winning isn't always perfectly clean. Sometimes winning is being victimized less, right? That's the best you can do.
And we don't want to think about it that way, but in fact, that is realistic.
Right. And honestly, I look at it this way. Every one of us was already victimized today because we all locked our house and we all locked our car door. The mere fact we had to do that means that criminals are affecting our behavior.
Well, it sounds like a fascinating class. Absolutely. You're absolutely right. So where do people go to learn more about it and find out next time you've got the class available?
Insightstraining.com. And we're doing a class here real soon here in Washington. And I'm doing a class, I think it's October in Austin, Texas also.
Awesome. Very cool. Well, Greg, again, thank you very much for coming in today. It's always a pleasure. Great amount of knowledge and interesting information to share with our listeners.
Well, thank you for having me.
All right, we're going to take a quick break here, and when we return, we're going to be talking about some tactical thinking when it comes to outdoors activities. So stay with us. You're listening to Thinking Tactically right here on Fox Sports 1380.
You're listening to Thinking Tactically, personal security for today's world. Brought to you in part by Insights Training Center, offering the most complete self-defense, firearms, and tactical training available to citizens, private organizations, law enforcement, and military. Online at insightstraining.com.
The Northwest Women's Shooting Network is a comprehensive resource in person and online for all women's shooting needs and questions. Everything from basic education to continuing education, we are here to help you find and buy the right gun for you, get the proper skills for personal protection, and to create a welcome and safe environment to learn with other women. Coming from over 30 years of combined experience in the shooting industry, we are mothers, sisters, wives, and just plain awesome gals. In other words, just like you. Our commitment is to help you become an informed, skilled, confident woman. We are based out of West Coast Armory North in Everett, Washington, minutes north of Seattle. We offer a variety of events, seminars, training, and more. Already we have hosted a variety of events such as Kids Safety Day, Ladies Night Out, and shopping events. And we also hold regular women-only classes in addition to our Ladies Shooting Club and Ladies League. At the range, we have over 70 rental firearms for you to try before you buy, and every Thursday is Ladies Day. Find us at westcoastarmorynorth.com under the Women's Network tab and on Facebook at Northwest Women's Shooting Network.
Welcome back to the radio show dedicated to information and education about defending yourself. Thinking Tactically, personal security for today's world. Once again, here are your hosts, John Holshan and Kevin Smith.
All right, welcome back to Thinking Tactically, personal security for today's world. John, so with this being our last episode leading into the summer and with the nice weather and such, I wanted to ask some advice on how to best be prepared for being outside and being safe and tactically aware when you're hiking, fishing, any type of camping, anything outside that I know everybody's looking to do this summer.
Yeah, great thought. You know, my family and I hike quite a bit, day hikes for the most part these days. We have always, I guess because we come from a background of, multi-day backpacking type thing, we tend to look like we're probably a bit over-prepared compared to the average crew on the trail.
So you're the ones that, when I go up for like the little 4-hour hike, that have the full, look like you're climbing Everest?
Well, we don't quite go that far, but everybody will have a day pack. Everybody has a day pack with the 10 essentials in it all the time, and that's, we are lucky enough where we live. It's just amazing. We have natural features that are available to us to where you can drive up park and go on a 2-hour hike and see something like Fraser Falls. If you haven't been there, look it up. It's awesome. Just an incredible waterfall, several hundred feet. And as I say, absolutely accessible. It's just, actually, it's about if you really are moving fast, it's about 20 minutes from the parking lot to your first view of the falls. Now, at that same time, that park branches out over a pretty large area, and people get out on the trails. And, you read about stories all over the country every year where someone gets separated from the rest of the group and ends up spending the night out in the woods because they got there late in the day, they got lost, it got too dark, they didn't get found, managed to link up, and, it's the next day before they've got the sheriff's department search and rescue out there. And, that type of stuff happens. So anytime we're out on the trails, we've got the day pack and the 10 essentials, and I think it's worth talking about that a little bit.
Okay, so you've mentioned now twice already this 10 essentials. So you got me on the hook now.
All right.
I need to know what the 10 essentials are.
Yeah.
I clearly probably only have like one of them with me when I hike. So
you probably have more than that, just don't realize it. So yeah, the 10 essentials have been around a long time. I'm not sure if it's the Seattle Mountaineers. Certainly the Seattle Mountaineers, going back toward like the 1930s and 40s, started this concept of preparing people. And again, it's here in this environment where we have people who are not outdoor people people, except a little bit in the summertime, that they get that opportunity. So 10 essentials nowadays, and there's various lists out there that have 10 items in it. The most modern concept is actually 10 areas or 10 types of equipment. First thing I think about is hydration. Well, let me back up a step. So 10 types of equipment, and within that type of equipment, I usually try and have two means of taking care of that need. For example, the first one, hydration. You got to stay hydrated. It's you're hiking, you're sweating. At the very least, on these little hikes, you come back and you've got a headache, and that's one of the signs of dehydration. Should you find yourself out overnight, you can go without food for quite a while, but your body really starts reacting to that lack of water, and you'll probably, you'll make it through an overnight. But that also leads to impaired decision-making and that sort of thing that now leads to people trying to walk out and falling off a cliff in the dark or something. So hydration is the first of the 10 essentials that I think about. And so that's as simple as a water bottle. The backup to that water bottle is nowadays for just a very few ounces, and that's the trade-off where all these essentials is how much weight and how much space are you willing to carry. I'm not out there with a backpack over my head for a day hike. I've just got a little tiny day pack. But I've got my water bottle, and I've got a filter. Nowadays, for $25, you can get a little filter that is good for something like 100,000 gallons of water. Takes care of everything except basically heavy metals and poisons. So it takes pretty much all of the natural threats out of your water and turns that stream or river water, of which we have a lot around here, into something drinkable. So hydration is number one. Number two, and the order, doesn't really matter. It's just, as I'm just thinking through these. Hydration, I mentioned food. You could make it for 2 or 3 weeks without food, but we're a lot happier if we've got a little food in our belly.
I was going to say, if I go more than a few hours without some food, I get a little cranky.
Yeah.
My wife doesn't like to be around me
There
anymore.
you go. Exactly. So, whether it's some protein bars, jerky, trail mix, you're going to want to snack along the trail, and I always just have a little extra just in case. So that's my second essential is food. Next is navigation. And that may be that I really, it's tempting to just get out and follow the signs on the trails. But, or follow the rest of the people. And in some places it's busy enough around here, you can do just that. Until you see something interesting over there, you go over to see that big tree, or you happen to wonder what's over that hill. And the next thing you know, you're turned around and you don't know where you are. So navigation is the next thing I think about. That can be a map, that can be a compass, that can be a GPS unit. People that are serious about it and travel the backcountry like I do on occasion never rely totally on a GPS. Your GPS can tell you which direction to go and how far it is, but your GPS has a limited ability, and yes, I've got the latest and greatest fancy, expensive ones that have maps built in, but even then, what you can see on a screen, the screen is real small. I like to have a backup map. It's a lot easier to plan a route into a new area and avoid, that the simpler GPSs tell me a direction and a distance. They don't tell me that there's 3 canyons between where I am and where I want to be, and that if I just went a little bit to the right, I could go around the mouth of those canyons instead of crossing over the 3 canyons. Yeah. So map, compass, GPS is the third navigation. Next is shelter. If I did have to spend the night out, does it ever rain around here? Gosh, we're in the Pacific Northwest. Our summers are pretty dry, but I always think still about shelter. Shelter and the fifth item, clothing, can work together. If I've got really sufficient clothing, as in a good, hard, waterproof shell, I might decide that I don't want to carry the weight of having even a tarp, for example. But something that I always have in my day pack is I've got a space blanket. That space blanket will work as a tarp. I get the kind that are a little more expensive, a little sturdier, and actually have grommets in the corners, so I can actually tie it off and use it as a tarp. So we're at hydration, food, navigation, shelter, and clothing. So a little more about clothing. Even though it's a nice warm day, when the sun goes down, the temperature drops rapidly. The easiest thing that I can have that gives me a lot more capability is a simple shell jacket, a waterproof shell. So a Gore-Tex, like a windbreaker, but out of a waterproof material. If I'm going a little higher, that's the other thing around here, you can easily get up to some altitude where it gets dang cold at night in the winter. So there I'm going to also want to have an insulating layer. When I think about shell, the very bottom thing in my day pack is a pair of rain pants, a pair of waterproof pants. I haven't had them out in years. But you know what? If I get stuck out overnight, the ability to have those waterproof pants on, and they hold heat to a great extent, along with that waterproof jacket, now I'm not likely to freeze overnight.
Well, and that's the goal, right? Not to freeze, not to starve or get dehydrated.
Yeah. Last item on clothing is we lose a lot of heat through our head. I always have just a light fleece or like a beanie, but it's just a fleece hat that, again, particularly my shell has a hood on it. So now a fleece hat, put the hood up, hunker down, and you're going to be pretty good. Next thing is the ability to make a fire. So with fire making materials, I always like to have two means of making a fire. So one might be a lighter, but a lot of lighters really don't do well in the wild. A lot of your lighters, your little disposable lighters, when you push the little lever down, that gas is escaping out of it. So if this is going to be something that's going to be in your survival case or kit or in this day pack, boy, I've had a few of them that I go to use the lighter and it's empty because something in my pack, it's moved around and that little lever has gotten pushed, and somewhere along the way, all the butane came out of the lighter. So those don't work real well. The old-fashioned kind, they dry out over time. So, there's a little bit of a trade-off there. Typically, my number one way of making fire are matches that are in a little waterproof match case. And then my secondary is some form of flint and magnesium or sparking device. So a way to make fire is, what am I, up to 6 now?
Yep,
up to 6.
So 4 more.
Medical is next one that I think about. Ought to have a simple first aid kit. Out hiking around, we don't have the same needs as my first aid kit on the shooting range, for example, where if somebody gets hurt on the shooting range, there's a possibility that it'll be from a firearm, and we're getting a big hole poked in them. Well, I might bring that kit along on my hikes, but I always have my Owie Boo Boo kit along on the, you've got your Band-Aids, your steri strips, which are a means to basically tape shut a larger wound. I always have a tourniquet, so a basic first aid kit, depending upon your medical capabilities. That kind of makes me think about the next category, which are tools. Under tools, that's where I consider my flashlight. I really like to have a headlamp for emergency use. That's basically a small flashlight that you wear, around a band around your forehead. So that allows me to keep my hands free. There are some great capabilities nowadays in those, from a very low power that'll save the batteries. Batteries will last for literally 100 hours or more of on time, to very bright and levels in between that you could put this on and walk down a trail if you needed to. Along with flashlight, I like to have some sort of knife or multi-tool. Multi-tools are great. That's those ones that have a screwdriver and maybe pliers as well as a knife blade. I might have a pocket knife and a multi-tool, but I consider tools. Last two are a means of communication, and that can be as simple as a whistle. If you're lost, you slipped off a trail and you sprained your ankle or broke your leg, and you're down in a ravine where people can't see you, your voice will get hoarse and give out on you fairly quickly. And in some cases, the voice travels well. You're around some of the rivers. The amount of background noise coming out of those rapids and those waterfalls is immense, and your voice gets lost. Communication can be as simple as a whistle. Old school is something that I can blow. These 3 blasts or 3 shots, series of 3 is the international distress signal. So a good loud whistle. That can be up to including, of course, your cell phone. It could be walkie-talkies if you have other people in the group that you can communicate with. And realize that we don't have to get very far out of town. We get down in some of these holes and your cell phone signal is gone. Signaling is another way to think about that, means of signaling that you are somewhere. A little bit of knowledge there can help also. If this does turn into an extended thing and people are looking at you from the air, just concepts about using branches or rocks to mark your location so it can be seen from the air. Last is sun protection. Sunburn can be pretty serious and come on pretty fast. I'm a pretty pale-skinned guy, and living in this part of the country, we don't get the opportunity to develop that tan. All of a sudden, you're there, and it's summertime.
Oh, dude, I was working on my deck about a month ago, and I burnt my neck so bad that it looked about as crimson as your shirt is there.
Yeah, absolutely.
It was not a fun day.
So sun protection, can be a long sleeve layer to protect your arms with a collar you can flip up. Obviously, sunscreen. Anytime I put sunscreen in my backpack, I don't know where this fits in the categories here, but if I'm going to put a tube of sunscreen in my pack, it's in the quart Ziploc bag with the insect repellent. That's one of the things you get out in some locations in our great Pacific Northwest, and bugs are just a real distraction. So anytime I think sunscreen, I just have it in the same bag as my insect repellent also.
Okay.
So all of that really will fit in a day pack and leave you a lot of room left over. And again, you can do multiples to cover each of these situations or each of these topics. You can have multiple ways to cover them. It just depends on how much you're willing to carry and that sort of thing. I've got doubled up on a lot of this stuff and still have a day pack that's 20 pounds maybe, and has a lot of extra room in it should I want to throw some binoculars in there, if I want to check out the bald eagles with a little bit of magnification, or I'm going somewhere that I'm looking at specific plants. I can put a plant identification book in or whatever.
Well, thank you, John, for giving us those tips for staying safe this summer when we're out and about. Remember, it's hydration, a form of food, some form of navigation, something to create shelter, good clothing, ability to make a fire, medical kit, so your tools, flashlights, knives, communication device, some way to communicate or signal, and then sun protection.
Absolutely. And, it really kind of goes back to, again, thinking tactically, right? Being prepared for situations. Yeah, you think you're going on a 4-hour hike. What's the classic Gilligan's Island, right? They're going out on an 8-hour cruise?
Yeah, a little
and
day cruise.
You don't know what it's going to turn into. So, and we started this when our kids were little, and give them their own little pack with just a little bit of this stuff, and you add tools as they get older and can take on greater responsibilities. They don't start off with a means to make fire, for example.
Yeah.
But every little kid feels better if he's got a flashlight should it get dark. So we start off right from the beginning, even on the day hikes. Start the kids off with having a backpack and get used to that. I always worry a little bit when I'm at some place like Fraser Falls and I see people heading out and, mom's wearing flip-flops and the kids have on shorts and a short-sleeve shirt. Nobody's got a bag of any sort with them, so I know they've got no extra clothing with them. They've got no water bottles. It's probably all going to be fine. but all it takes is somebody falling down and twisting an ankle or a knee or getting hurt worse or getting temporarily lost, and things get a lot more uncomfortable when you haven't prepared.
Yep. All right. Well, we are out of time. We want to thank you for joining us for Thinking Tactically in our 13-episode series here. If you have any questions or things you want to know about, please email us at thinkingtactically@gmail.com, and we'll respond back to you through that. And let us know if you would like to see us back on and later on.
Yeah, it's been great fun, and I hope we've covered some topics that are useful and interesting to all of you, and we will be looking at the possibility of continuing this in the fall. We'd love to hear from you if you found it interesting and useful, and let us know you'd like to hear us again.
And remember, you can always stop by West Coast Armory North. It's right here in South Everett. You can stop by and see John down there, or go to their website at westcoastarmorynorth.com.
Yep, come on in and say hi.
Thank you for listening, and as always, stay safe.